Be me, Miranda Cole, 39, project executive at a regional construction management firm downtown. Spent 12 years turning delayed builds into ribbon cuttings and angry clients into repeat business. My specialty was private work, rich clients, vague paperwork, impossible schedules, and no useful explanations. Night the building failed. I was driving home along the river after another coordination meeting. Phone lit up with missed calls from site security and one from maintenance supervision. Ignored the first calls because everyone panics whenever concrete makes ordinary settling noises. Then security sent a photo showing a lobby window cracked from corner to corner. Turned the car around because broken glass meant insurance paperwork, and paperwork meant my weekend died. Rain was coming sideways across the windshield, and the river looked wider than usual. Not a sharp noise, not a pipe pop, more like furniture dragged beneath stone. Turned the headlights toward the plaza and saw rainwater running into a crack that wasn't there earlier. Inside, the receptionist counter sat crooked enough that even denial finally looked expensive. Sight lights reflected off wet cladding, and the whole riverside facade looked slightly wrong. Then a guard whispered the lobby desk had moved 6 inches since his shift began. That was the moment Colin's old voice came back like a splinter under skin. He had told me bad ground never argues loudly until it finally decides everything itself. 3 minutes later, the plaza cracked beside the planters and my stomach dropped hard. Before the first column failed, before alarms started, I already knew whose report mattered. Rewind 14 months. Before rain, before lawyers, before my inbox became a crime scene. We were hired for a 7-story private commercial structure on a riverfront parcel. Tight site, expensive soil, prestige address, strange delivery instructions, and a client who never appeared. Every document called it a private administrative facility, and nothing more useful than that. The client wanted privacy, speed, premium finishes, and absolutely no schedule drift whatsoever. The parcel sat above the river walk with an older retaining wall below. Looked gorgeous from the street. Glass, trees, expensive stone, sunsets in every direction. Looked worse from engineering borings because the site was basically wet history pretending to be land. Fill on top, then sand, then loose, silty layers, then deeper material worth trusting. We brought in Colin Mercer, 57 geotechnical engineer, 30 years on waterfront foundations. He just opened reports and quietly told rooms whether the earth beneath them respected mathematics. First boring summaries came back and his face changed before he even finished reading. He asked for additional borings near the river edge and below the planned south wing. Second set looked worse. Higher groundwater, looser sand, pockets of soft silt, old debris. Colin requested a full geotechnical risk review before structural design advanced any further. We met in the large conference room with plans, coffee, and client counsel on speakerphone. Colin pointed at the sections and explained the site wanted deeper piles and stronger stabilization. He said seasonal groundwater changes could reduce lateral support and trigger settlement toward the river. He said the retaining wall below was older than recorded and probably relied on luck. He said shallow assumptions on a pretty site still become expensive after concrete hardens. His recommendation added roughly $2 million and maybe 10 to 12 extra weeks. Client counsel asked whether those recommendations were required or merely conservative professional preference. Colin said required was the wrong word if they wanted something standing 10 years later. I asked whether 7 stories really justified such a heavy foundation solution on this parcel. Colin nodded and said river sites do not care whether a structure is 7 stories. They care how loads transfer, how water moves, and how impatient owners become during rain. I'd built mid-rise offices and hotels on miserable sites without anyone predicting doom. To me, Colin represented delay, added scope, longer financing, and the smug relief of caution. Meanwhile, the structural team was already developing a leaner foundation scheme with shorter piles. Priya Nair led that team, 31, brilliant, polished, fast, and dangerously good in meetings. Priya believed the site needed discipline, not fear, and said modern modeling covered the uncertainties. Colin had the unnerving habit of sounding boring, right before reality proved him prophetic. She proposed a more economical pile system with a stiffened mat and localized improvement zones. Less steel, less deep drilling, smaller equipment footprint, faster sequence, and cleaner cost profile. She admitted the solution had tighter tolerances, but said construction controls would manage that. Collins said controls do not change geology. They only document disappointment with greater precision. Still, I was already leaning toward Priya because clients pay for confidence, not old warnings. Priya was talented enough to impress clients, but not experienced enough to distrust beautiful numbers. Every progress meeting rewarded certainty, and certainty always arrived dressed nicer than caution. Client counsel requested an options memo comparing the heavy foundation against the accelerated alternative. I wrote the memo myself, careful, polished, technically literate, and quietly slanted toward speed. I described Colin's approach as robust, proven, costly, and likely beyond practical necessity. I described Priya's system as optimized, closely engineered, and well-suited for current project demands. I did include risks, but packaged them like manageable footnotes instead of structural warnings. He also noted the old retaining wall deserved intrusive verification before major excavation began. I thanked him, filed the message, and buried it inside a longer coordination thread. 2 days later, the client approved the accelerated foundation concept pending third-party review. Colin argued that third-party review should happen after additional subsurface exploration, not instead. Nobody wanted more borings because drilling rigs mean noise, permits, complaints, and uncomfortable evidence. So I hired a boutique geotechnical consultant from another city to review assumptions quickly. He returned with caveats, suggested monitoring, a few local reinforcements, and general approval language. That was enough for everyone who needed permission, including me, to stop listening carefully. Colin objected in writing, twice, then requested a formal risk acknowledgement from executive leadership. My boss hated paper trails unless they protected us, not when they accused us. He told me to handle Colin and keep coordination moving without turning debate into politics. I met Colin in a trailer beside the site and tried a softer tone first. Told him the client had spoken, financing windows mattered, and we needed solutions, not stalemates. He looked at the revised drawings, then at me, like measuring how deep denial can settle. He said he was offering a solution, but nobody wanted the one grounded in soil behavior. He asked whether I understood what lateral movement does once a rigid structure commits itself. I said we had contingencies, monitoring points, and an experienced structural team handling interface details. He said instruments don't stop movement, Miranda. They only timestamp the moment you started losing. That line made me angry because it framed caution as wisdom and management as vanity. I told him he was no longer leading geotechnical coordination if he couldn't support direction. He folded his notebook, stood up, and said, "Then stop calling this engineering disagreement. Call it what it is. Schedule choosing the answer before the math is complete." After that, Colin stopped attending weekly design meetings unless specifically requested by legal or leadership. Priya took over soil coordination with the outside reviewer in our field engineering group. Excavation began in early spring with dewatering pumps humming day and night beside the river. The first problem came when water seeped faster than predicted along the south excavation face. Colin emailed saying that seepage pattern supported his earlier concerns about subsurface variability. I forwarded the note to Priya, who replied that field conditions still matched acceptable tolerances. We added more drainage blanket material, smiled at inspectors, and kept digging. The old retaining wall also revealed patchwork repairs nobody had documented in archived city files. Again, Colin asked for a pause in supplemental investigation of the wall and adjacent soils. Again, I declined because the excavation was open, equipment rented, and delay would cost blood. Foundation subcontractor installed the shortened piles and cast the mat in staggered sections. Quality control passed, concrete breaks looked fine, and everyone relaxed because fresh concrete flatters bad decisions. Framing started early summer, columns rising above tarps, then floors, stairs, and the central core. From the riverwalk it looked sleek. Sharp corners, bronze glass, recessed terraces, expensive without shouting. Security systems were heavier than normal, data conduits oversized, and several rooms had unusual load ratings. I didn't care as long as invoices cleared and the client stayed invisible. Throughout superstructure work, the surveyor logged tiny settlement differences on the south side. Not huge numbers, just enough to create extra conversation during coordination if anyone felt bored. Priya said early settlement during loading was expected and trending within modeled behavior. Colin stayed mostly silent until steel terrace supports went in along the riverside facade. Then he sent another note asking who had verified final lateral assumptions after utility trenching. Because trenching near weak ground, he wrote, can rearrange support like stealing books from one shelf. I hated his metaphors because they made complex risk sound obvious in retrospect. Priya answered with charts, calculated factors, and references proving movements remained acceptable. My boss congratulated her during a meeting and said this was modern engineering at work. Everyone nodded because success always sounds convincing when the building is still standing. The project topped out in autumn, and the client finally visited one evening after hours. 3 black SUVs arrived, 5 suited people walked through with a lawyer, and no introductions. They toured upper floors, service rooms, and the sublevel, speaking quietly, asking almost nothing. After they left, even the security manager admitted the place felt wrong in a deliberate way. Closeout dragged because high-end finishes always arrived late and never fit perfectly the first time. Still, we were on track to hand over before year-end, which meant bonuses. Colin's name came up less and less, usually as a joke about pessimists and buried rivers. I joined those jokes because victory feels safer when the doubter becomes a character instead of witness. Final commissioning began with generators, climate control, access systems, elevators, and drainage checks. The drainage test near the Riverside Plaza backed water longer than expected after a heavy shower. Facilities consultant blamed clogged temporary filters and asked for minor grading corrections before turnover. We made them and moved on because every project finishes inside a fog of small defects. The client, unsurprisingly, requested early access for selected equipment before formal turnover. Technically not ideal, practically unavoidable, especially when people writing checks hate the word no. They brought in dense storage cabinets, server racks, and something crated like museum equipment. Nobody explained loads because the rooms were already designated for specialized private use. Priya asked whether the client was exceeding our assumptions in those areas. I said the structural schedule included plenty of reserve and this was not the moment. Truth was, I did not want another technical debate with turnover 2 weeks away. December came wet and ugly, with river levels rising and storm drains working overtime. The surveyor flagged increased settlement on the south edge after a long rain cycle. He called me because numbers were no longer trending flat like previous months. Priya reviewed the data and said we should watch it daily but avoid overreaction. Then she added one sentence I still hear clearly when rain hits windows at night. If the trend continues after this storm, we need Colin back for independent interpretation. I should have done that immediately, but handover week makes idiots out of otherwise functional adults. We had final cleaning underway, punch walks scheduled, and client representatives flying in quietly. So I said, watch it, document it, and we'll reassess after the weekend. By the time I considered slowing down, schedules, contracts, and pride were already welded together. The weekend brought more rain than forecast and wind that shoved river water against everything stone. Maintenance staff reported doors sticking along the south lobby and hairline cracks near the mezzanine glazing. Everyone always blames the trade directly beside them, never the ground underneath everyone together. Monday morning, the polished stone floor near reception showed a faint ridge across one joint. By afternoon, that ridge had widened enough to catch the wheel of a cleaning cart. Security also noted a basement corridor smell like wet concrete and disturbed soil. Priya finally stopped sounding confident and asked me to authorize emergency review of settlement markers. I agreed, but only after the afternoon client walkthrough because priorities were still upside down. Their lead representative barely looked at finishes and spent most time asking about access restrictions. When Priya mentioned active monitoring, the representative said stability concerns should remain strictly internal. After they left, Priya and I reviewed the latest readings in a freezing conference room. Southwest corner had dropped further, not inches yet, but decisively beyond comforting explanations. She went pale, then said Colin had warned about directional movement toward the river months earlier. I asked whether the structure itself was at immediate risk, and she refused certainty. She said we needed Colin, the outside reviewer, and probably city officials by morning. I said morning because night emergency meetings create records nobody can control. Colin called me first, not the other way around, because the surveyor had reached him already. He asked one question, simple and terrible. Are the south doors binding yet? I looked at the cracked lobby joint and said, yes, slightly. How did you know? He said because settlement toward the river twists entries before people notice frame distress upstairs. Then he told me to close the building, keep everyone outside, and stop adding loads. He also said if rain continued, the retaining wall zone could be losing support beneath us. I heard myself arguing anyway, talking optics, contracts, client property, possible overreaction, temporary movement. Colin cut through all of it and said, Miranda, buildings don't practice collapsing first. Close it now or spend the rest of your life explaining why you waited. I wish that sentence had fixed me, but ego is stubborn even with panic inside it. I compromised like a coward. Partial closure, limited access, security posted, consultants meeting at dawn. Then I drove home pretending exhaustion, not denial. Explained why my hands would not stop shaking. 2 hours later, security called about new glass cracking and a popping sound near the south stairs. That brought me back through the storm toward the river and the beginning of this nightmare. When I arrived, the plaza pavers near the terrace had heaved into a slight ridge. Inside the lobby, one marble panel had separated from the wall, with a dark gap behind. You could hear strained metal somewhere overhead, tiny ticks between heavier, slower groans below. Priya arrived minutes later wearing boots over office clothes and carrying drawings in a plastic sleeve. She looked at the floor, the doors, the cracked glazing, then whispered, "We are moving." Not settling, moving, which sounded far worse because movement has direction and intention. Colin got there last. Wet coat, hard hat, flashlight, expression like someone meeting expected weather. He walked the lobby once, looked at the ridge, then stepped outside toward the river edge. When he came back, he told everyone to clear completely and call the fire department. Said the south foundation line was likely rotating because supporting soils had softened and shifted laterally. He believed the retaining wall toe had lost confinement, allowing deeper material to creep riverward. Colin said maybe for hours, maybe for minutes, not for anybody standing inside debating. I finally called emergency services and the city duty officer, speaking too calmly to sound innocent. While we waited, the client's representative called demanding entry for secured materials on the third floor. Colin grabbed the phone from me and said, "Your materials are now the least expensive problem." That made me realize he had stopped trying to persuade and started triaging consequences. We moved everyone behind barricades while rain hammered the river and flashing lights painted the glass red. The first visible failure was not dramatic, just one terrace column settling with a dull jerk. Then a section of the south facade wrinkled vertically, like paper pushed from below. Somebody near me said "holy shit" and kept saying it, because language had abandoned him. A deep crack ran across the plaza toward the lobby steps and swallowed a planter whole. Through the glass, we watched the reception desk slide slightly left without anyone touching it. The building tilted so subtly at first that disbelief lasted longer than it should have. Then the south stair tower split away from interior finishes and exposed a jagged seam. Glass burst outward, alarms screamed, and one corner of the third floor dropped visibly. The sound was monstrous. Concrete breaking, steel tearing, stone grinding, and water rushing below everything. Half the south wing folded downward toward the river, while the central core fought for seconds. Floors pancaked unevenly, not a clean vertical drop, more like a body losing one leg. Dust mixed with rain and turned instantly into gray sludge across the access road. When it stopped, 6.5 stories had become a broken wedge against itself. The river kept moving beside it, indifferent, almost patient, like it had been waiting. No workers died because we had cleared the building in time, which became everyone's favorite miracle. Fire crews established collapse zones, police sealed streets, and my phone began vibrating without pause. My boss called first, asking if the structure was a total loss. I remember staring at the ruin and thinking that question deserved prison, not an answer. By dawn, every local station had aerial footage of the leaning wreck beside the river. The mystery building was no longer mysterious, just notorious, a private monument to ignored physics. Investigators arrived before breakfast, city engineers, insurance teams, structural specialists, and eventually state regulators. They collected drawings, monitoring logs, boring reports, meeting minutes, emails, text messages, and access records. Investigators loved chronology because chronology turns ambition into a chain of signed opportunities. They also found Colin's written objections, neatly dated, technically clear, and impossible to misunderstand now. My memo comparing foundation options resurfaced and looked filthier than anything recovered from the mud. Priya gave interviews to investigators for 2 full days and came out looking 10 years older. She admitted the settlement trend had shifted beyond modeled behavior during the final rain cycle. She also admitted Colin's earlier recommendations would have materially reduced failure risk at the site. I tried leaning on the third-party review, the monitoring program, and the client pressure. None of that helped, because documents showed every major warning passed across my desk first. Investigators then discovered the client had moved heavy storage systems and equipment inside before turnover. That revelation complicated the sequence, but not the root cause, which was still unstable support beneath foundations. The client tried burying those details because the building's true use was deeply embarrassing. Not criminal exactly, just private records, high-value physical archives, and data they preferred hidden. The basement and third floor were designed for secure storage far denser than ordinary offices. Colin later said hidden loads did not create the problem. They only insulted it further. The official forensic report blamed settlement, lateral soil movement, inadequate foundation conservatism, and ignored warning signs. It also noted the aging retaining wall had likely contributed by losing support during prolonged saturation. My name appeared 6 times, never with the word criminal, always beside worse professional descriptions. overrode concerns, minimized risk communication, advanced occupancy activities, delayed emergency escalation, failed to act. My boss tried distancing the company from me until email chains pulled his fingerprints everywhere too. He survived with retirement, negotiated softly behind closed doors in a public statement about lessons learned. I got terminated for cause with no severance, no graceful language, and no reference. Priya resigned before they could decide whether to fire or shield her. Last I heard, she left structures entirely and went into software modeling for interiors. The outside reviewer lost major clients, then his license, then whatever certainty he sold professionally. Reporters cared about both scandals, which made every article feel uglier than the last. For months, I gave depositions where patient lawyers walked me through each dismissive decision. They read my emails aloud in rooms cold enough to make shame feel architectural. They asked why I treated repeated technical warnings as obstacles instead of governing constraints. Asked why I postponed independent review until after the client walkthrough that final day. Asked why I authorized early equipment access before final turnover on an actively monitored structure. There is no elegant answer when arrogance has already been timestamped in committee notes. I sold my condo, emptied retirement accounts, and still couldn't outrun the wreckage. Nobody in serious commercial work wanted the woman tied to the river collapse case study. I landed at a tiny residential contractor 6 months later, coordinating permits and cabinet deliveries. Salary less than half my old pay, responsibilities smaller, dignity smaller still. Nobody there cared about my leadership philosophy or polished presentations or luxury coats. They cared whether framing inspections passed and whether homeowners got their windows before snowfall. 2 years passed before I returned anywhere near the river parcel again. The ruins were long gone and new deep foundation work was underway behind cleaner fencing. The new crews worked slower, louder, and uglier, which suddenly looked exactly like competence. I stopped across the street because the drill rigs were larger than our old plan allowed. Rows of serious equipment punched downward where we once argued 7 stories didn't justify caution. A sign listed consultants and subcontractors, and there was Colin's name among the lead reviewers. No mystery now, no cheap speed, no decorative confidence pretending math was optional. Just proper ground improvement, long piles, wall replacement, drainage redesign, and a schedule built for weather. I almost went in to speak with him, maybe apologize again, maybe hear silence one more time. Then I saw the client's black SUVs parked inside and stayed exactly where I was. That was the strangest part. Not that they rebuilt, but that they learned faster than me. I watched a laborer guide rebar cages into the ground deeper than our old budget tolerated, and understood the building never failed in one stormy night beside flashing emergency lights. It failed the afternoon Colin first said the site wanted respect, not optimism dressed as efficiency. Everything after that was just gravity finishing minutes from a decision already made.